সেটা আর একটা সময় আমি তোমাদেরকে বলবো। I guess it is too early to talk about net right now, but it is never too early. Like some people who want to crack the G exams, JEE, the engineering and the doctor who wants to become doctor, they go to quota and they die by suicide and all. Many of them die, and there's a tremendous pressure on them. Or some people want to qualify the UPSC. They also take tuitions and all that into coaching center and all. They go there, they start when they are reading in class 7. So you are already late for net. But net, the discussion on net will take place sometimes later. Okay, maybe in another class, maybe. But of course, it's very nice of you. I'm very encouraged that you want to know it right from now, what you can do. So that's very good. We will talk about it. Anyway, so the development of romantic prose with special reference to Coleridge, Wordsworth, Shelley and Peacock. Well, of course, there are other writers. There is De Quincey, Thomas De Quincey, Charles Lamb. What about their essays? But that is a different question. I have chosen, or if a question like this comes, that comment on the development of English romantic prose with special reference to these writers, we can talk about this. Now, one by one I will talk about the prose of these four writers. First, Coleridge. We all know that Coleridge is the author of Biographia Literaria. It was published in 1870. Biographia Literaria, published in 1870. Of more than, or I think 18 or 23 chapters. I have lost count of the number of the chapters he wrote. But in that work, the greatest criticism, the greatest analysis or discussion of literature is to be found, especially of the romantic age. If you want to understand, if you want to deeply understand the romantic literature, one has to read the relevant parts of Biographia Literaria. Like the romantic poetry, romantic prose was also stylish, but the language, as the romanticists themselves wanted to show, they wanted to keep the language simple. But we will realize when, if you read even Preface to Lyrical Ballads, the extended version, or Biographia Literaria, or Defense of Poetry, you will find that the language is not really easy, especially not easy for students of India, students in India, because English is not our mother tongue, English is not our first language. So, I mean, this is something that nobody writes in the answers. They answer as if they are sitting in England. We tend to answer the question not from the perspective, not from the real perspective, not from the perspective of who we are, but we try to answer it in some disjointed reality where we think that we are also English people. But if you write your answers from the perspective of a boy from Kolkata, only then will it be more relevant. Examiners perhaps have never seen an answer like that. I have not. I mean, I have never seen anybody, or maybe rarely, that somebody who had written against a poet, like you have written in She Walks in Beauty Like the Night. What was your point? I liked it. That this is unreal.
She walks in beauty by brand appreciates the beauty of another woman by only perceiving the body from the unrealistic in the modern period as the poet has poured into the emotions through her plays.
Yes, so there is a lot of discussion on the beauty of the skin.
Skill, but not of the heart.
But of course, that is what Byron wanted to do. Byron was not just a romantic poet, he was a dangerous satirist. He is more known for his satire. ও কাউকে প্রেজ করছে না, পিটান দিচ্ছে.
How?
He is actually thrashing the lady. How? Because what came in your mind came in Byron's mind also. How? What comes in your mind? The beauty or beauty of the dress, showing off beauty is unrealistic. It's a waste of time and energy. Among all the romanticists, Byron was also a romanticist, but he was very practical also. Actually, the poem written on a particular lady who wore a black dress, I mean she was in mourning. Her husband or a near relative of her passed away, and that is why the black dress. That is what the background of the story, that is the background of the poem. Right? So, even in a mourning dress, she needed to look perfect. Can you relate with whatever is going on right now in our, I won't say in our immediate society, but also in our immediate society and in the and on the screens?
Somehow, I can relate.
What is the relationship?
Now, nobody mourns in the death of a person, in fact of his family. But relatives or any other, I don't see them to mourn. Or either they seem happy in their inner, which comes out of the face, like the economy or the, the property or the things which he left. Like that is what is the main point of discussion when somebody dies, somebody elderly dies. Obviously an elder, I don't sit with mourning because when you will go to আমি জানি স্যার শ্রাদ্ধ বাড়িতে ইংলিশে কি বলে, but
A funeral.
Yes sir, a funeral. You will see mainly the elders keep gossiping about how she could, but not about them,
Yes.
but the property. Like
Very
this
good.
one you take, it was going to take that.
Yes.
Same thing happened.
In our society, mourning is another, or a funeral is another place where we can get together and gossip. And Byron satirizes that. And not just that, some people take selfies with people who
Yes,
have
sir.
met with an accident and dying.
Yes sir, the blogging, he has broke his leg and he's like, guys, this is the, he had just broke his leg and he's lying over there, so call a doctor, you can't see.
Yes. So, and in those reels, in those blogs, the people who make the blogs, they dress up. They need to look good.
Good.
I mean, if I were a blogger, I will not wear this dress and make a blog. Even if I am making this YouTube recording or live, I am not using my face because my face is rather too ugly. So what I am doing, I am keeping the phone on the table and obstructing the view. It's all black. It's just voice.
Nice.
Right. Anyway, so what I am saying is satire was there. Lord Byron was using even poetry as a means of satire, but the romantic prose was very serious in nature, stylish and serious. They really believe that all these things that they are writing make sense, that the language of the poetry should be man speaking to men. That is what Wordsworth used to say in his preface to lyrical ballads. But in his poems we found that there was a huge difference between what he wrote in his manifesto of romantic poetry in the form of the preface to the lyrical ballads and in his actual practice of writing. However, strangely, romantic prose or romantic criticism, romantic prose was basically romantic criticism, went the nearest to practice. Among all criticisms, you will, in your advanced stage of learning, you will learn about various criticisms. And in those criticisms, in one of those criticisms, the romantic criticism will also come up. And I don't know if I will be teaching you that, you will be told that what are the features of this romantic criticism. So, the romantic prose, say, of Coleridge, found in greatest quantity in Biographia Literaria. Because that will disrupt the live thing. Anyway, I'll call her after the class. So, but Coleridge did not just write in Biographia Literaria or about Biographia Literaria. His prose is not just contained in Biographia Literaria. He also wrote his prose in a kind of a writing called Table Talk. He actually published a newspaper called The Watchman, which was mostly talking about, his style was journalistic style, and he tried to create a better society. That was his philosophy. And talking about philosophy, he also believed in a kind of a new kind of government system called pantisocracy. The plan was like he and 12 other families along with Robert Southey will go to America, US, and they will settle in Pennsylvania, and they will create a new form of a society that will be completely free of any kind of government. It will be a kind of a self-rule. So there is some prose devoted to that establishment of a utopian government or a utopian society also. Okay, but since Biographia Literaria is like Coleridge's Areopagitica, which is one of his best work, there are chapters in which he talks about poetry, poet. So in one of his chapters in Biographia Literaria, as far as my knowledge goes, he defines poetry as best words put in best order. Best words put in best order. Similarly, Wordsworth also defined poetry. How did he define poetry? Not poem, but poetry. We need to make a distinction now between a poem and poetry. Can you tell me the difference between poem and poetry?
Poem and poetry?
Yes. Is there any difference between poem and poetry?
The poem is the work of a poet, and poetry are the works of a poet, but not only one poem. A comparison of or a bundle of different poems only by the same author.
So that is an anthology of poems. But yes, you are correct. A poem or poems or anthology of poems are individual concrete works of a poet. But poetry refers to the way in which the poems were written. If poem is what? The product. Poetry is how? The process.
Can you repeat?
Poetry can simply be imagined as style. Poetry can simply be imagined as the style of an individual writer. But the word poetry has a larger significance. It's a larger word. It's a bigger and more interesting word. Poetry is the style, the way in which a poet writes. Poetry, we often call English poetry. So, what we mean to say is that the way in which any and all English poems were ever written or will be written. So, poetry is a huge circle. Sorry. Within that circle, there is a circle of poems. So, poem is the expression of poetry, you can say. So anyway, we will talk about it later as well in our discussions. But how does Coleridge define poetry? Spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. I think we already discussed it earlier, before in the first semester, I guess, when we were talking about romantic poetry. I don't know. I remember doing this.
So you did the modern poetry and Sir explained the.
Okay. So I think I talked with the fourth semester or someone. Anyway, so Wordsworth defines poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, and there is a gap. There are some lines that are expunged, and then we usually say, and emotions recollected in tranquility. Overflow of spontaneous feelings, and after a gap there is some lines, but we avoid those lines and say that emotions recollected in tranquility. And this is written in prose. This is the idea of poetry by Wordsworth. And this is found, or this could be found, in the preface to lyrical ballads, which is the prose contribution of Wordsworth. So they define who is a poet, they define who is a poet, what is a poem, they define what is poetry. So can you imagine that it is in the romantic prose that something impossible has been attempted to define poetry.
Sir, so like poetry or poems, so the definition only means, only goes for the romantic period, or for the all of the poems that emerged from the Elizabethan to the romantics or the Victorian. Just only the romantics or the entire?
See, they defined poetry according to whatever they understood. They defined poetry according to their perspectives or perspective. It could be applied to all poetry of all ages, of all places. Because even in India, there was a romantic period of Indian English literature.
Romantic? I didn't heard of it.
Romantic age of Indian English literature. I mean, after all, Rabindranath Tagore was a great romanticist. His poetry is romantic poetry, basically. Toru Dotto. Her poetry is also very romantic. Okay, not realistic but romantic. So in Hindi there is a period called Chayavad. So that is romantic. That is romanticism in Hindi poetry, following perhaps the British. After all, we were colonized and we will follow our masters, right?
So sir, each and every like language has a kind of a feeling of like the English.
Yes. I mean, we can use the definition of best words put in best order, universal. Yes, anybody could hardly disagree to this definition of the word. Best words put in best order. How can you disagree with it? What will you say against it? What else is poetry then? However, according to postmodern writers, the order does not matter. Neither does the words. Absurd poetry. Of course, but that happened much later. And absurd poetry is not my cup of tea because I will not understand it readily. Or absurd poetry is something that is, one genre of poetry, but that does not disqualify. Or we can say that absurd poetry is the best absurd words put in the best absurd order. So anyway, this is what the contribution, or this is how the prose developed in the Romantic age under Coleridge, because Coleridge now infused the right spirit of intellectual criticism. Criticism was always there. Sir Philip Sidney had started this whole critical thing by writing Apology for Poetry. But Coleridge refined it, made it one of the best. So did Wordsworth. Wordsworth did it in the Lyrical Ballads was published in 1798. The preface was really very small over there, very short. Then as the number of editions went on, 1798, 1800, 1802, I think 1805, 1807, 1815 or 1811, gradually, I think the largest addition made by Wordsworth was, I think, in 1802 to the preface to the Lyrical Ballads. In fact, nobody remembers Lyrical Ballads. Everybody remembers it as preface to Lyrical Ballads, because the preface became this thick and the poems were like this, because there were only 24 poems. 4 by Coleridge, 19 by Wordsworth. Now this is the net question. These are net questions. Okay, these are the questions that will be asked in net. Okay. So anyway, your training has begun from your first year, and that is why you need to preserve these notebooks with dates, with you have to maintain it properly. Anyway, so next let's come to Shelley. But before Shelley, just like Stephen Gosson had written a treatise named School of Scandal or School for Scandal, and had called English drama or English poetry to be worthless and a moral and a source of moral corruption. And Philip Sidney Apology for Poetry was defending English literature. Similarly, I think it was Stephen Peacock, I don't remember the exact name of this person, but I remember Peacock. You can find it out from the net. He wrote something against English poetry once more. And defense of poetry was something of a counter discourse, was something of a challenge to Peacock. Peacock had said a lot of things against English poetry, romantic poetry, like it is escapist and this is that. And defense of poetry actually defended English poetry, English romantic poetry, or English poetry in general, against the claims made by Peacock. Now, how does this develop the English prose? Because especially known as English, especially known for their poems, known for their ornate style and known for their passionate exuberance, emotional outbursts, Shelley proved that he could order his thoughts very precisely and clearly in prose as well. And the way in which Shelley wrote the prose perhaps sometimes exceeded his poetry. In passionate outbursts, yes. In passionate outbursts. It was like prose poem. But Wordsworth and Coleridge, not so much. They were more restrained, I would say. They were more restrained by the middle style, you can say. But Shelley's style is like bombastic. Okay. So, but he used this bombastic style to counter whatever charges Peacock had laid against, or whatever charges some other writers have laid against English poetry. Something that we should not forget is that the growth of the critical magazines and Edinburgh Review, the Examiner, were the height of English critical insight, and Keats was mercilessly attacked in the Examiner as well as in the Edinburgh Review, and it broke his heart. Okay. And romantic poets never called themselves romantic poets. They were called romantic poets by the critics making fun of them. Lake poets was also a very derogatory term that was used for the poets residing by the lake. Wordsworth, Robert Southey, Coleridge and others. Okay. So this is the development, or this is the way in which the romantic prose went from just being a vehicle of satire to something that was not just for defense, not just for satire, not just for pamphlets, but also for philosophizing. So Coleridge, to large extent Wordsworth, they just did not write essays, they write philosophies in prose. Okay, so all right, let us stop here today and we will continue